Margaret Thompson lived a peaceful life in a quiet suburban neighborhood. At 72 years old, she spent most of her days tending to her garden or taking leisurely walks around the block. Her only companion was Max, a large German shepherd with piercing eyes and a calm demeanor. To anyone passing by, Max seemed like an ordinary pet, a loyal dog who followed Margaret everywhere. But there was more to him than met the eye. Max wasn't just any dog. Before coming into Margaret's life, he had served as a highly trained military K-9 overseas. He had been part of search and rescue missions, sniffed out explosives, and even protected soldiers during dangerous operations. When his service ended due to age, he was adopted by Margaret, who didn't know much about his past, but felt drawn to his gentle nature. Over time, they formed an unbreakable bond. Margaret often joked that Max understood her better than people did. What she didn't realize was how much truth lay behind those words. Every morning, Margaret would wake up early to take Max for a walk. The two were inseparable, their routine bringing comfort to both. Margaret loved chatting with neighbors along the way while Max stayed close, his sharp eyes scanning everything around them. Though he appeared relaxed, he was always alert, ready to respond if anything seemed off. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street, Margaret decided to sit on her porch. She pulled out an old photo album filled with memories of her late husband and happier times. Max lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws. It was a serene moment, one that made Margaret feel content despite the loneliness that sometimes crept into her heart. But peace can be fragile. Unbeknownst to Margaret, trouble was lurking nearby. Two men, Derek and Carl, had been watching her house for days. They thought it looked easy to break into, assuming an elderly woman living alone wouldn't put up much of a fight. That night, armed with greed and recklessness, they approached her property under the cover of darkness. Their footsteps were silent, their intentions sinister. As Derek and Carl moved closer, neither paid attention to the dog lying quietly on the porch. If they had known Max's history, they might have hesitated, but all they saw was a big dog sleeping peacefully. They assumed he was harmless, unaware that beneath that calm exterior lay years of rigorous training and instincts honed for protection. For now, Max remained still, his ears twitching slightly as he picked up on their movements. He knew something wasn't right. And though Margaret sat oblivious, absorbed in her memories, Max was already preparing himself for whatever came next. The air grew tense as the two men stepped onto the porch, their figures barely visible in the dim light. Margaret finally noticed them when it was too late. One of them grabbed her arm roughly, startling her. She dropped the photo album, her hands shaking as fear gripped her. But before either man could react further, a low growl cut through the silence, a sound so deep and menacing it sent chills down their spines. Both turned to see Max rising slowly, his teeth bared and his body coiled like a spring. In that moment, they realized their mistake. This was no ordinary dog, and they were about to learn exactly what happened when someone threatened his human. Derek and Carl were not masterminds. They were small-time criminals looking for a quick score. Both in their late 20s, they had turned to petty theft after struggling to make ends meet. Derek was the more aggressive of the two, always eager to take risks, while Carl preferred to stay in the background, letting others do the dirty work. Together, they made a mismatched pair, desperate and reckless, but not particularly smart. For weeks, they had been driving around neighborhoods at night searching for houses that looked easy to break into. Margaret's home caught their attention almost immediately. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, which meant it probably didn't have expensive alarm systems or nosy neighbors. The flower beds were neatly trimmed, the windows sparkled, and the porch light cast a warm glow over the front door. To Derek and Carl, it screamed vulnerable. On the night they decided to act, they parked their car several blocks away to avoid drawing suspicion. Dressed in dark clothing and wearing gloves, they crept through the shadows toward Margaret's house. The streets were eerily quiet, with only the occasional sound of crickets breaking the silence. As they approached her backyard, they crouched, behind bushes watching and waiting. From their hiding spot, they could see Margaret sitting on her porch. She seemed completely unaware of their presence, flipping through pages of an old photo album. Her dog, a large German shepherd, was lying at her feet, his head resting on his paws. To Derek and Carl, he looked lazy, maybe even asleep. They figured he wouldn't cause any trouble. After all, what harm could a pet dog do? Carl tapped Derek on the shoulder and whispered, "Let's just grab whatever we can and get out of here. Don't waste time." Derek nodded, his confidence growing. He convinced himself this would be an easy job. They had done this before, and nothing had gone wrong. Why should tonight be any different? As they moved closer, stepping carefully to avoid making noise, neither man noticed how Max's body language changed. His ears perked up slightly and his tail stopped wagging. Though he appeared calm, his sharp eyes tracked their every movement. Years of military training had taught him to assess threats quickly, and these two strangers reeked of danger. Max knew instinctively that something was off. When Derek stepped onto the porch, his heart pounding with adrenaline, he reached out to grab Margaret's arm. He thought she'd freeze in fear, too shocked to fight back. What he didn't anticipate was the sudden explosion of motion beside him. Before he could process what was happening, Max let out a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down his spine. Both men froze, their eyes locking onto the dog as he rose to his full height, muscles taut and ready to strike. Carl tried to reassure himself, whispering, "It's just a dog. Stay calm." But deep down, he felt uneasy. There was something about the way Max stared at them, his gaze unwavering, his stance intimidating, that made Carl question whether they had made a terrible mistake. Derek, however, brushed off his partner's hesitation. "We've got this," he muttered under his breath, though his voice lacked conviction. In that moment, neither man realized the truth. Max wasn't just protecting his territory. He was defending the person he loved most, Margaret. And when it came to her safety, he was capable of far more than either intruder could imagine. The moment Derek grabbed Margaret's arm, everything changed. Until then, Max had been lying quietly at her feet, his body relaxed but his senses on high alert. He had watched the two men approach, their movements clumsy and deliberate, their intentions clear even before they stepped onto the porch. But it wasn't until Derek's hand clamped down on Margaret's wrist that Max shifted from observation to action. Margaret gasped in shock, dropping the photo album she had been holding. The pages scattered across the wooden floorboards, forgotten, as fear gripped her. Her heart raced, and for a split second she felt utterly helpless. But before either man could react further, a deep, menacing growl erupted from beside her. It was a sound that sent chills through anyone who heard it. A primal warning that left no room for misinterpretation. Derek froze, his grip loosening slightly as he turned his head toward the source of the noise. What he saw made his blood run cold. Max was no longer lying calmly at Margaret's feet. Instead, he stood tall, every muscle in his powerful frame, coiled like a spring. His lips curled back to reveal sharp teeth, and his eyes locked onto Derek with an intensity that was almost unnerving. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, without hesitation, Max sprang into action. He moved with astonishing speed, closing the distance between himself and Derek in the blink of an eye. With precision born from years of training, Max lunged forward, sinking his teeth firmly into Derek's forearm. The force of the bite caused Derek to yelp in pain, releasing Margaret instantly. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest as she tried to process what was happening. Meanwhile, Carl, standing just behind Derek, panicked. Carl took a step forward, intending to intervene, but Max was already one step ahead. As soon as Derek fell back, clutching his injured arm, Max turned his attention to Carl. Without missing a beat, the dog let out another ferocious bark, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Carl hesitated, unsure of what to do. When he finally mustered the courage to kick at Max, the dog dodged effortlessly, using his agility to evade the clumsy attack. Max didn't stop there. In a blur of motion, he pivoted sharply and tackled Carl to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of him, leaving him sprawled on the porch, dazed and terrified. Max stood over him, his teeth bared and his stance unyielding. Carl raised, his hands defensively, stammering, Okay, we're sorry, just call him off." By now, Margaret had regained some composure. Though shaken, she realized that Max wasn't going to harm her. On the contrary, he was protecting her with a level of skill and determination she hadn't known he possessed. Tears welled up in her eyes as she watched him keep the two men pinned down, his growls low and steady, ensuring they stayed where they were. The entire ordeal unfolded in mere seconds, but it felt like an eternity to everyone involved. Derek and Carl, once confident in their plan, now trembled with fear, realizing they had underestimated their target and its protector. They glanced at each other, silently pleading for a way out, but Max gave them no opportunity. Every attempt to move was met with a snarl or a snap, keeping them firmly under his control. Neighbors began to notice the commotion. Lights flickered on in nearby homes, and voices called out from windows asking what was happening. Someone shouted, "I'm calling the police." The distant wail of sirens soon followed, growing louder as emergency responders rushed to the scene. Still, Max remained vigilant, standing guard over the intruders until help arrived. For Margaret, the world around her felt surreal. One moment she had been peacefully reminiscing about old memories. The next, her life had been thrust into chaos. Yet through it all, one thing was certain: Max had saved her. And as she looked at him now, his ears alert, his body poised for action, she couldn't help but feel overwhelming gratitude. Whatever these men had planned, they wouldn't succeed. Not tonight. Not while Max was there to protect her. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the night air, growing louder with each passing second. Derek and Carl, still pinned down by Max, exchanged panicked glances. Their initial bravado had vanished, completely, replaced by sheer terror. They were trapped, physically and mentally cornered by a dog they had grossly underestimated. Every time they tried to move, Max responded with a low growl or a quick snap, his teeth gleaming in the dim porch light. It was clear he wasn't going to let them escape. Margaret, though shaken, managed to pull herself together enough to reassure her neighbors who had begun gathering at a safe distance. "It's okay," she called out weakly, her voice trembling, but firm. "My dog, he's got them." Her words only added to the awe rippling through the crowd. No one had expected this quiet, elderly woman's pet to turn into such a formidable force. The murmurs among the onlookers grew louder as they watched Max stand guard over the two intruders, his posture unwavering. When the police arrived, their flashing red and blue lights illuminated the entire street. Two officers stepped out of their patrol car, guns drawn, cautiously approaching the scene. At first glance, it looked chaotic. An elderly woman clutching her chest, two men lying helplessly on the ground, and a massive German shepherd standing between them. But as the officers moved closer, one of them froze mid-step, his eyes widening in recognition. "Wait a second," the officer muttered to his partner, lowering his weapon slightly. "That's Max, isn't it?" His partner frowned, confused. "You know this dog?" The first officer nodded slowly. "Yeah, he's a retired military canine. I worked with some handlers during training exercises years ago. This guy's no ordinary pet. He's trained for combat." The revelation spread quickly among the responding team. Another officer approached carefully, speaking softly to avoid startling Max. "Ma'am," he said gently to Margaret, "is your dog trained to respond to commands?" Margaret hesitated, unsure how to answer. She knew Max obeyed basic instructions, like sit and stay, but beyond that she didn't fully understand the extent of his training. Still, she nodded nervously. "I think so," she replied. "He's very smart." Taking a chance, the officer crouched slightly and gave a calm command, "Max, heel." To everyone's amazement, Max immediately backed away from Derek and Carl, retreating to stand beside Margaret. His body remained tense, ready to act if needed, but he followed the order without hesitation. The officers exchanged astonished looks before moving in to secure the intruders. Handcuffs clicked into place as Derek and Carl were hauled to their feet, both visibly shaken and muttering apologies under their breath. As the situation calmed, Margaret sank onto the porch steps, her legs too weak to hold her upright any longer. Max stayed glued to her side, nudging her hand with his nose as if checking to make sure she was all right. Tears streamed down Margaret's face, not just from fear, but from relief and gratitude. She wrapped her arms around Max's neck, burying her face in his fur. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You saved me." Meanwhile, the officers began questioning the men who confessed almost immediately. Derek admitted they had chosen Margaret's house because it seemed easy, assuming an elderly woman would be an effortless target. They hadn't counted on the presence of Max, or his unparalleled ability to protect. Their arrogance had led them straight into disaster. Word of the incident traveled fast. Neighbors lingered outside, discussing what they had witnessed. Some expressed shock. Others marveled at Max's bravery. One woman even brought Margaret a glass of water, urging her to take deep breaths. "Your dog is incredible," she said earnestly. "We're all so lucky to have him here." As the chaos subsided and the police prepared to leave with Derek, and Carl in tow, Margaret realized something profound. Her quiet life had been forever changed, not by the attack itself, but by the reminder of the extraordinary bond she shared with Max. In that moment, surrounded by concerned neighbors and comforted by the steady presence of her loyal companion, Margaret felt a newfound sense of strength. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. With Max by her side, she could face anything. The days following the incident were a whirlwind for Margaret. News of the attempted break-in and Max's heroic intervention spread like wildfire through the neighborhood and beyond. Reporters arrived at her doorstep, eager to capture the story of the elderly woman and her fearless dog. At first, Margaret was reluctant to speak with them. She didn't see herself as extraordinary, nor did she think her life warranted public attention. But after some gentle persuasion from friends and neighbors, she agreed to share her side of the story. Sitting on her porch with Max lying faithfully at her feet, Margaret recounted the events of that fateful night. Her voice wavered slightly as she described the moment the two men grabbed her, but it grew steadier when she talked about Max. "He's more than just a dog," she said softly, reaching out to stroke his fur. "He's family, and he saved my life." Tears glistened in her eyes as she spoke, and Max leaned into her touch as if understanding every word. What truly amazed people was learning about Max's background. When reporters dug deeper, they discovered his history as a retired military K-9 who had served overseas. Veterans groups reached out to Margaret, praising Max's actions and offering support. One veteran even visited her home, sharing stories of how dogs like Max had protected soldiers in dangerous situations. "These animals are heroes," he told her. "They risk their lives for us, and then they come back here and continue to serve in different ways." Margaret listened intently, realizing for the first time just how remarkable Max really was. She had adopted him without knowing much about his past, drawn only to his calm demeanor and soulful eyes. Now, she understood why he always seemed so alert, why his instincts were so sharp. Max wasn't just protecting her because she was his owner. He was doing what he had been trained to do: safeguard those who couldn't protect themselves. As news of Max's heroics spread, donations began pouring in from all over the community. Local businesses organized fundraisers to honor Max and other retired service animals. A bakery hosted a Pause for Protection event, donating proceeds to organizations that helped place retired military and police dogs in loving homes. Even children got involved, creating colorful posters and heartfelt thank you notes for Margaret and Max. One little girl wrote, "Thank you for being brave. My mom says your dog is a superhero." Despite the outpouring of love and admiration, Margaret struggled to shake off the lingering effects of the attack. Though physically unharmed, she found herself jumping at sudden noises or feeling uneasy when walking alone. Max never left her side during these moments, his presence a constant source of comfort. Whether they were sitting quietly together or taking slow walks around the block, he seemed to sense when she needed reassurance, pressing closer to her as if to say, "I'm here." Friends and neighbors rallied around her, determined to help her heal. They brought meals, invited her to social gatherings, and offered companionship whenever she needed it. One neighbor, an older man named Walter, became a regular visitor. He often stopped by to chat, bringing along his own dog, a small terrier named Bella, for playdates with Max. Watching the two dogs romp in the yard brought smiles to Margaret's face and reminded her that life could still hold joy, even after something so frightening. Throughout it all, Max remained the steadfast guardian of their little household. His protective instincts seemed stronger than ever, yet he continued to show the same gentleness that had endeared him to Margaret in the first place. Strangers passing by would stop to admire him, remarking on his size and noble bearing. Some even asked if he was part wolf given his imposing stature. Margaret chuckled at the comments, proudly explaining his true heritage and the incredible work he had done before retiring. For Margaret, the experience was transformative. It forced her to confront her vulnerability while also reminding her of her resilience. With Max by her side, she felt capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they proved that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes it arrives on four legs, with wagging tails and unwavering loyalty. In the weeks that followed, Margaret and Max became local celebrities. Their story resonated with people, far beyond their small suburban neighborhood, capturing hearts across the city. Local newspapers ran headlines like, "Heroic Hound Saves Elderly Woman," and "Retired Military Dog Proves Unstoppable Protector." Social media buzzed with photos of Max, his piercing eyes and regal stance making him look every bit the hero he was. People marveled not just at his bravery but also at the bond he shared with Margaret. One morning, Margaret received an invitation to attend a community event honoring acts of courage. The organizers wanted her and Max to be recognized for their role in stopping the attempted robbery. At first, Margaret hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight and worried about drawing too much attention. But after some encouragement from Walter and other neighbors, she agreed to go. "Max deserves this," she told them firmly. "He's done something extraordinary." The day of the ceremony arrived, and Margaret dressed carefully, choosing a simple yet elegant outfit. Max wore a shiny new collar, gifted by one of the local pet stores, adorned with a tag that read "Hero." As they walked into the community center together, the room erupted into applause. Dozens of people, neighbors, veterans, local officials, and even strangers who had heard their story, rose to their feet, clapping enthusiastically. Margaret blushed, overwhelmed by the warm reception, while Max remained calm and composed, as if he understood the significance of the moment. A representative from a veterans organization stepped forward to speak. Holding back tears, he praised Max not just for his actions that night but for his years of service to the country. "These dogs are more than animals," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They're partners, protectors, and friends. When they retire, they deserve homes where they can live out their days surrounded by love, and Margaret, you've given Max exactly that." The crowd cheered again, many wiping away tears. Margaret was then invited to say a few words. Standing at the podium with Max sitting proudly beside her, she took a deep breath before speaking. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "When I adopted Max, I didn't know much about his past. All I knew was that he had a kind heart and needed someone to care for him. What I didn't realize was how much he would change my life for the better." She paused, looking down at Max, who gazed up at her with unwavering devotion. "That night when those men came onto my porch, I thought I was alone. But I wasn't. Max was there, ready to protect me without hesitation. He showed me what true courage looks like. Not because he's fearless, but because he acted despite the danger. And now, thanks to him, I feel stronger too. So thank you, everyone, for celebrating us today. But really, the hero is right here." She gestured to Max, who wagged his tail slowly, earning another round of applause. After the ceremony, Margaret and Max were swarmed by well-wishers eager to meet them. Children lined up to pet Max, giggling as he gave them gentle licks on their hands. Veterans shook Margaret's hand, thanking her for giving a retired canine such a loving home. Even the mayor stopped by to congratulate them, presenting Margaret with a framed certificate declaring Max an honorary town hero. For Margaret, the event marked a turning point. It wasn't just about recognition, it was about connection. She realized how much impact their story had on others, inspiring kindness, gratitude, and respect for the unsung heroes among us, both human and canine. As she walked home with Max trotting happily beside her, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they weren't just survivors of a terrifying ordeal, they were symbols of resilience, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a person and their dog. In the weeks after the ceremony, Margaret found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed. The attack had been terrifying, leaving her with lingering anxiety that crept in during quiet moments. Sometimes, she'd wake up in the middle of the night, her heart racing as memories of that evening replayed in her mind. But every time fear threatened to overwhelm her, Max was there, his steady presence a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. Max seemed to sense when Margaret needed extra comfort. On days when she felt particularly low, he would nudge her hand with his nose or rest his head gently on her lap. His unwavering loyalty gave her strength, helping her push through the hardest moments. Slowly but surely, Margaret began to feel like herself again. She started taking longer walks around the neighborhood, something she hadn't done since the K incident. With Max by her side, she felt safe, his alert eyes scanning their surroundings as if guarding her from any potential threats. The community continued to rally around Margaret, offering support in ways both big and small. Walter stopped by regularly, often bringing fresh-baked cookies or inviting her over for tea. Other neighbors checked in frequently, making sure she had everything she needed. One woman even offered to teach Margaret yoga, believing it might help calm her nerves. Though Margaret initially laughed at the idea, me? Yoga? She eventually agreed to give it a try. To her surprise, she enjoyed it, especially the breathing exercises that helped ease her tension. Inspired by the outpouring of kindness, Margaret decided to pay it forward. She began volunteering at a local animal shelter, using her experience with Max to advocate for adopting retired service animals. Many of these dogs, like Max, were highly trained and deeply loyal, but they often faced challenges finding homes because people assumed they were too intense or difficult to care for. Margaret knew firsthand how rewarding it could be to open your heart to such a dog, and she wanted others to see their value. At the shelter, Margaret became a familiar face, always accompanied by Max. Together they worked with staff to socialize, the animals helping them adjust to life outside of strict training environments. Margaret loved watching Max interact with the other dogs, his natural leadership shining through as he guided them during playtime. Visitors to the shelter were often amazed by how gentle and patient he was, despite his imposing size. "If Max can do this," one volunteer remarked, "then maybe more people will consider adopting these incredible dogs." Margaret also began sharing her story publicly, speaking at events organized by veterans groups and animal rescue organizations. Her talks focused not just on Max's heroics, but also on the importance of giving retired working dogs a second chance at happiness. Each speech brought new opportunities to connect with others who shared her passion for helping animals. Through these experiences, Margaret discovered a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that while the attack had shaken her, it had also opened doors she never expected. As time passed, Margaret noticed subtle changes within herself. She felt braver, more confident, not just because of Max's protection, but because of the resilience she'd uncovered inside her own heart. She no longer saw herself as someone vulnerable. Instead, she viewed herself as a survivor, someone capable of facing adversity head-on. And though scars remained, both visible and invisible, they served as reminders of how far she'd come. Every evening, as Margaret sat on her porch with Max lying faithfully at her feet, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life hadn't turned out exactly as she'd planned, it rarely did, but she couldn't imagine trading her journey for anything else. With Max beside her, she had faced danger, embraced change, and rediscovered joy. And as she watched the sun set over her quiet street, she knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she and Max would face them together. Their bond was unbreakable, a testament to love, trust, and the extraordinary power of companionship. Margaret and Max's story didn't end with the ceremony or the weeks of healing that followed. It only grew richer. Together, they became a symbol of courage and loyalty, not just in their community but far beyond. People continued to reach out, sharing how their journey had inspired them. Some were veterans who spoke fondly of working alongside canine units during their service. Others were ordinary dog owners who saw Max's heroics as proof of the incredible bond between humans and animals. For Margaret, it was humbling to realize her quiet life had touched so many lives. One day, while volunteering at the animal shelter, Margaret received an unexpected letter from a soldier stationed overseas. He wrote about his own experiences with military canines, describing how these dogs had saved lives, including his own, on countless occasions. "Your story reminded me of my partner Rex," he wrote. "He was injured in action and retired last year. I worry sometimes that people won't understand what makes him special, but hearing about Max gives me hope. Thank you for showing everyone what these dogs are truly capable of." The letter brought tears to Margaret's eyes. She carefully tucked it away in a drawer, along with other notes and letters she'd received over the months. Each one served as a reminder of the ripple effect their story had created, a testament to the power of kindness, resilience, and love. As time went on, Margaret noticed subtle changes in Max too. Though he remained vigilant and protective, there was a newfound calmness about him. Perhaps it was the routine of visiting the shelter or the attention he received from admirers. Whatever it was, he seemed happier than ever. His playful side emerged more often now, whether it was chasing tennis balls in the backyard or bounding through piles of autumn leaves during their walks. Margaret marveled at how adaptable he was, seamlessly transitioning from fearless protector to joyful companion. Their daily routines became sources of joy rather than fear. Morning strolls around the neighborhood turned into opportunities to meet new friends, both human and canine. Children would run up to greet Max, giggling as he playfully sniffed their pockets for treats. Neighbors waved warmly, calling out greetings as Margaret passed by. Even Walter's little terrier Bella joined them occasionally, her tiny legs racing to keep up with Max's long strides. Life felt lighter, fuller, and infinitely brighter. But perhaps the most profound change was within Margaret herself. Gone was the woman who once doubted her ability to handle adversity. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and deeply connected to those around her. She no longer shied away from challenges, knowing she had faced one of the greatest fears imaginable, and survived. With Max by her side, she felt unstoppable. On crisp winter mornings, Margaret liked to sit on her porch wrapped in a blanket, watching Max patrol the yard like the guardian he was born to be. Sometimes, she found herself thinking about the night. Everything changed, the terror, the chaos, the moment when Max transformed into a force of nature. But instead of feeling haunted by those memories, she felt grateful. Grateful for the lesson they taught her, that even in the darkest moments, light can emerge in unexpected ways. Years later, when Max grew older and slower, Margaret cherished every moment with him even more. They still visited the shelter occasionally, though now Max spent most of his time lounging on the porch or napping by the fire. Margaret knew their time together was limited, but she refused to let sadness overshadow their days. Instead, she focused on creating new memories, cozy afternoons reading books, lazy evenings listening to soft music, and quiet mornings sipping coffee together. When the inevitable day came, Margaret mourned deeply, yet without regret. Max had given her so much: protection, companionship, and a renewed sense of purpose. His legacy lived on in the countless lives he had touched, including hers. And though her heart ached, she took solace in knowing that Max's spirit would always remain with her. Margaret continued volunteering at the shelter, advocating for retired service animals and helping others find loving homes. Her voice carried weight, inspiring people to see these dogs not as daunting warriors but as loyal friends waiting to give their all. Through her efforts, dozens of canines found families who cherished them as much as she had cherished Max. In the end, Margaret's story wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. From an unassuming widow living a quiet life to a beacon of hope for communities near and far, she proved that strength comes in many forms. And at the center of it all was Max, the four-legged hero who reminded everyone that true courage knows no bounds. Their journey may have begun with danger, but it ended with love, a legacy written in wagging tails and unwavering hearts.